You can run all you want, but you'll never get far enough, he whispered, his voice as cold and calculated as the night air. Emily's heart hammered in her chest as she pressed her hand against the cold, metal door. She knew who was behind her. He didn't need to announce his arrival, his presence alone was enough to stop her in her tracks. The streets were empty, the world outside quiet except for the pounding of her pulse in her ears. She had tried to escape. She had run for miles, through alleyways, down side streets, doing everything she could to put distance between herself and Dominic Romano. But now, she realized how futile it all was. The 65-year-old Mafia boss had been playing a game, and she was the prize. She had thought she could outsmart him, that her desperation would give her the upper hand, but she had underestimated him, and worse, she had underestimated herself. She had never known fear like this. There was something about Dominic that pulled at her in a way that made her want to fight, yet she couldn't bring herself to do it. The power he exuded, the way he moved through the world with such unshakable confidence, it was like gravity. The closer he got, the harder it became to breathe, to think. She had found herself caught in his web without even realizing how deeply tangled she was. He had promised her safety when she thought she was out of options, and she had clung to that promise as though it were the only lifeline she had left. But now, standing on the brink of a decision she wasn't sure she was ready to make, Emily could feel the weight of the situation closing in. Her fingers tightened around the door handle, her mind racing. Could she escape again? Could she outrun him? Or was it too late? His soft chuckle reached her ears, sending a chill down her spine. You think you can hide, Emily? You think you can just walk away from me? He took a slow step forward, his footsteps deliberate, as if he were savoring the moment. She didn't dare turn around, but she didn't need to. She could feel him. The air shifted when he moved, like the room itself bent around him. Dominic Romano wasn't just a man. He was an idea. He was power, control, and now, he was claiming her as his own. The tears she fought to hold back threatened to fall, but she refused to let him see her break. Please, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was begging him or herself. I just want to go home. His voice dropped lower, a dark promise hidden beneath each word. Home isn't safe for you anymore, Emily. Not from me. The words hit her like a wave crashing on the shore, sweeping away everything she thought she knew about herself. She had never been afraid of men like him before. But now, she was terrified of the way his presence filled the space around her, the way his words cut through the air and wrapped around her like chains. You belong with me now. Don't fight it, he added, almost tenderly, though the edge of command in his voice left no room for argument. Her breath hitched as she felt him draw closer, his presence swallowing the room whole. There was no escape. There never had been. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. The sound of Dominic's footsteps grew louder, closer, until it felt like the walls were closing in on her. She didn't turn to face him, but she could feel his presence, like an overwhelming storm about to consume her. She had tried to outrun him, tried to escape the world he had dragged her into, but now it seemed as though it was all too late. His voice broke through the silence, smooth and unwavering, like the calm before the chaos. You think you can still run, Emily? You've been running for too long. His words were a reminder of her helplessness, of how she had come to realize that running away from him was never going to work. She clenched her hands at her sides, her nails digging into her palms as if to ground herself in reality. Please, I don't belong here, she whispered, though the words felt weak even to her own ears. This life isn't for me. I'm not like you. Dominic was quiet for a moment, the sound of his breath the only thing filling the air between them. Then, with a voice that seemed both gentle and commanding, he responded, You're wrong, Emily. You belong here more than you realize. You just don't know it. Yet. His words were laced with a certainty that made her shiver, but she refused to acknowledge the strange pull they had on her. She had been living in fear of him for days, trying to figure out how to escape his grasp, but the deeper she got, the more tangled she became in his world. The world he controlled. She had been forced into a corner, and she had no choice but to stay there, to face him and the fate he had set for her. She swallowed hard, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. I never wanted this. I never asked for this. Her voice was a little stronger now, though it still wavered with uncertainty. Dominic didn't seem to be in a hurry. His presence was like a weight, pressing down on her, as if the very air around them was thick with expectation. No one ever asks for this kind of life, Emily, he said, his tone softer now. But you'll learn that it's not about asking. It's about accepting. The silence stretched between them again, heavier this time. Emily stood frozen, not knowing whether she should take a step toward him or away. Her mind raced, but her body refused to move, caught in the web he had spun around her. She had been so sure of her escape just hours ago. She had felt free. But now, she felt anything but free. He had found her, as he always did, and she couldn't help but wonder if she had ever truly been able to escape. You'll never escape me, Emily, he continued, his voice low and assured. And that's okay. Because I will take care of you. You'll see. You'll understand soon enough. The words hung in the air like a heavy promise, and for the first time, Emily wasn't sure if she wanted to escape anymore. Maybe she had been running for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to just stop and let someone else take control. Maybe, just maybe, Dominic was right. Maybe she was meant to belong to him all along. The next few days were a blur. Emily found herself lost in a world that was both alien and strangely comforting. Dominic never let her out of his sight. Whether he was in the room or not, his presence lingered in every corner of the mansion. She couldn't deny the pull he had on her, the way he seemed to control every moment, every movement, without even trying. At first, she resisted. She wanted to run, to leave, to return to her old life. But every time she tried, she found herself hesitating, caught in the web of his calm, steady gaze. He didn't push her, but he didn't need to. He had already won. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, Dominic would say, his voice soft, almost coaxing, but she could hear the unspoken promise in his words. But you'll stay, and you'll learn. Emily had been prepared to fight, to keep her independence, but the longer she stayed, the more she realized how small and insignificant her rebellion felt against the power that surrounded her. She had expected to hate him, to despise everything about this life he was offering her, but something about his calm demeanor made it harder to hold on to that anger. I'm not your prisoner, she finally said one evening, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Dominic turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly as if considering her words. You never were, he replied, his voice low and measured. You're here because you belong here. Just like I knew you would. His words felt like a weight on her chest, heavy and undeniable. She couldn't deny the truth in them, even though it made her stomach churn. He had always known. I'm not like you, she whispered, almost to herself. I don't belong in this world. Dominic moved closer then, his footsteps quiet, deliberate. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone was enough to make her heart skip a beat, to remind her that there was no escape. You think you're different, Emily, he said softly, his voice almost a caress. But the truth is, you're more like me than you think. You just don't see it yet. She wanted to argue, to shout at him, to tell him that she would never be like him. But the words never left her lips. Instead, she found herself staring into his eyes, drawn in by the quiet certainty that filled them. It was like he had already mapped out her future, and she was simply following the path he had laid for her. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something else. Something that made her feel both safe and trapped at the same time. You're not trapped, Emily, he said as if reading her mind. You're free to choose. But remember, some choices have consequences. His gaze softened then, just a little, as if he were offering her a glimpse of something more. And I think you'll learn to accept those consequences. Eventually. She didn't know how to respond to him, so she said nothing. She had nothing left to say. She had tried to run, tried to fight, but now, she found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, Dominic was right. Maybe this was where she belonged. Days passed, and Emily found herself slipping further into a life she never expected. Each day, Dominic's presence became more a part of her world, as if he had always been there, pulling the strings, making sure she was never far from his reach. She had stopped trying to leave, stopped questioning the decisions that had brought her here. There was no use anymore. She was surrounded by luxury, but it all felt hollow. The mansion was beautiful, yes, but it was nothing more than a gilded cage. She still spent most of her time alone, wandering the vast hallways, trying to find some sense of peace that always eluded her. It wasn't that she had come to accept this life, it was more that she had no choice but to adapt to it. Dominic was never far away, always watching, always guiding her, whether she wanted it or not. Every now and then, he would disappear for meetings, leaving her with the lingering feeling that something much larger than her own life was unfolding just out of her reach. But whenever he returned, his gaze would settle on her, intense and filled with an unspoken promise. She wasn't sure what that promise was anymore, but she felt it every time. One evening, as the sun set behind the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors, Emily found herself standing by the large fireplace, staring into the flames. She hadn't spoken to Dominic all day. He had been gone, as usual, handling his business, but he always returned. He always did. As the crackling of the fire filled the silence, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was spiraling, that she was slowly losing herself in this strange world. She didn't know if she wanted to belong to him, not in the way he expected, but every part of her wanted to believe there was something more to him than the world he represented. The door opened behind her, and she didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "You look lost in thought," Dominic's voice broke the stillness. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to turn and face him. "I'm just thinking," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic walked toward her, his movements smooth, like a predator closing in on its prey. His eyes never left hers, and for a moment, she could feel the weight of his gaze pressing down on her. He stopped just a few feet away, his presence dominating the room. "You've been thinking a lot lately," he said, his voice calm but with an underlying edge. "You're not as lost as you think, Emily." She looked at him, trying to hold her ground. "I'm not sure what you want me to be," she replied, her words catching in her throat. "I don't know who I am anymore." Dominic studied her for a long moment, and for the first time, she saw something softer in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was there. "You're exactly who you're meant to be," he said, his voice lower now, as though sharing a secret. "You belong with me, Emily. And deep down, you know that." Her heart raced in her chest as his words sank in. She couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, the way he made her feel both safe and trapped at the same time. She didn't want to belong to him, but she was starting to wonder if she already did. The realization hit her like a wave, and she quickly tried to push it aside. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice trembling. Dominic reached out, gently lifting her chin so that she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "You don't have to say it out loud," he murmured. "But you know, Emily. You know that you belong with me." The room felt smaller then, the distance between them narrowing as he leaned in closer. Emily felt her breath catch, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't want this. She didn't want to feel this way, but she couldn't stop it. And in that moment, as his eyes bore into hers, she realized that maybe, just maybe, Dominic was right. She belonged here. She belonged to him. The days that followed were a strange mix of peace and unease. Emily had stopped trying to fight it, stop trying to leave. Every time she looked into Dominic's eyes, she saw a certainty that both terrified and comforted her. He had made it clear that she belonged with him, but there was a part of her that still resisted. Not because she wanted to leave, but because she was scared of what that meant. She wasn't used to someone knowing her so well, seeing right through her defenses, as if he could read her thoughts before she even had the chance to understand them herself. Dominic never pushed her, never demanded more than what she was willing to give, but the weight of his presence was always there, hanging in the air like an unspoken promise. Emily found herself wondering more and more if that was enough. Was it enough to just be here with him, in this world that seemed to have no boundaries, no rules but his own? The mansion had started to feel less like a cage and more like a home, though she couldn't yet explain why. One evening, Dominic returned from one of his meetings earlier than usual. He walked into the living room where Emily was sitting by the window, gazing out at the sprawling grounds, her thoughts far away. "You've been quiet today," he said, his voice calm but filled with that same quiet authority. Emily turned to face him, not bothering to hide the confusion that had been plaguing her mind for days. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel anymore," she admitted softly. "I don't know if I should be grateful for what you've done for me or resentful." Dominic didn't respond immediately. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. There was something almost understanding in his gaze, like he knew exactly what she was struggling with. "You don't have to feel anything, Emily. Not yet. You don't have to decide anything." His words were soft, but they carried a weight. "You're here now, and that's all that matters." Emily shook her head, the frustration building up inside her. "That's the thing. I don't know what this is. I don't know where I fit into this life of yours. And maybe that's what scares me the most." Dominic's expression softened, just a little, and he walked over to the chair across from her, sitting down slowly. "You're not here to fit in, Emily," he said, his voice steady but with an edge of something deeper. "You're here because you belong. Not to me, though I'll admit, that's part of it, but to this world. This life. You're not just a piece in the puzzle. You are the puzzle." Emily stared at him, trying to process his words, trying to make sense of the emotions that were swirling inside her. She had never asked for this life, but she couldn't deny that there was something about it that made her feel like she was finally waking up from a long, restless sleep. Maybe she didn't have all the answers. Maybe she didn't know where her place was yet. But she was starting to understand that Dominic wasn't just controlling her life, he was offering her a life she had never imagined for herself. A life where she didn't have to apologize for what she wanted or who she was. She didn't have to run anymore. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly, almost to herself. Dominic's eyes darkened with something she couldn't quite place, but there was a softness there too, a tenderness she hadn't expected. "Good," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "Because you're mine now, Emily. And I'm not letting you go." There was no anger in his words, no threat, just a quiet, undeniable truth that settled deep in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. Maybe, just maybe, this was where she was always meant to be. The days turned into weeks, and Emily found herself settling into a life she never thought she would accept. The mansion had become a place of quiet routine, though a part of her was still unsure how she felt about it. She had stopped resisting, stopped questioning everything that seemed to surround her. Dominic was always present, a constant in her life, but somehow, she found herself learning to live with his presence. Not just tolerate it, but actually exist within it. It was strange. She wasn't sure if she liked it, but she couldn't deny that there was a certain comfort in the structure he provided, the way he took care of everything. Even the moments of silence between them didn't feel as oppressive anymore. In fact, it was in those moments when she felt most at peace. The mansion felt more like home now, and it wasn't just because of the luxury, though the sprawling grounds and grand hallways were certainly impressive. It was the sense of security that came with Dominic's unwavering presence. She could trust him in ways she never thought she would trust anyone. But that trust came with a weight she couldn't fully comprehend. There were things she still didn't understand about Dominic, about who he was and the world he lived in. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, he carried an authority that left no room for doubt. He wasn't cruel, but he was commanding, and that was the part of him she found both fascinating and intimidating. There were moments when he would sit beside her in silence, his presence as strong as ever, yet he wouldn't say a word. And those moments, strangely enough, were the ones when she felt closest to him. She didn't have to talk, didn't have to explain herself. He simply understood. "You've been quiet today," Dominic said one evening as they sat in the library. Emily had been lost in a book, but his voice, soft yet firm, pulled her back into the present. She looked up, meeting his gaze. It was a question, but not one that expected an answer. "Just thinking," she replied, closing the book and setting it aside. "Thinking about what?" He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense, but not demanding. "About everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About how I ended up here. About you." Dominic didn't say anything at first. He just studied her, as if weighing her words. There was a brief moment of silence, and then he spoke. "You're still figuring it out, aren't you?" His voice was low, almost gentle, but there was an edge to it, a reminder that he knew exactly what she was going through. Emily nodded slowly. "I don't know what to think. Sometimes it feels like I'm losing myself in this life." Dominic's expression softened, but only slightly. "You're not losing yourself, Emily," he said, his voice reassuring. "You're finding yourself. The life I offer you, the life you're starting to understand, it's not about control. It's about freedom. The freedom to be who you truly are, without the constraints of the world outside these walls." Emily looked at him, searching his face for any hint of insincerity, but all she saw was calm certainty. She wasn't sure if she fully understood what he meant, but there was something in his words that resonated with her, something she couldn't ignore. "And what if I don't want this life?" she asked, her voice soft, but firm. Dominic's gaze didn't waver. "You'll want it," he said, his voice low, but filled with conviction. "Because this life is yours, Emily. And it always has been. You just didn't know it until now." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emily swallowed, trying to process everything. She wasn't sure what it all meant, but in that moment, she realized that Dominic wasn't just a man who controlled her life. He was offering her something more. Something she hadn't realized she needed. A place, a purpose. And maybe, just maybe, a reason to stay. The weight of his words settled over her, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what was coming next. Emily had spent weeks trying to figure out where she stood with Dominic, and the more time she spent with him, the more she realized that there were no clear answers. He had never demanded anything from her that she wasn't willing to give, but the weight of his influence was always there, subtly guiding her decisions, shaping the way she viewed the world. There was a part of her that wanted to rebel, to escape the sense of control that seemed to permeate every corner of the mansion, but another part of her was starting to embrace it, to realize that maybe this was the life she was meant to lead. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with shades of pink and orange, Dominic walked into the room, his presence as commanding as always. Emily was sitting by the window again, lost in thought, but this time, she didn't turn to look at him. She didn't need to. She could feel him there, standing in the doorway, watching her. "You're quiet tonight," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she focused on the view outside, the peaceful calm of the setting sun contrasting sharply with the chaos inside her mind. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel anymore," she admitted after a long pause, her voice barely audible. Dominic stepped closer, but he didn't sit down. He remained standing a few feet away, watching her with that intense gaze of his. "What do you feel right now?" he asked, his voice soft but laced with curiosity. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I feel lost," she said honestly. "Like I'm walking through this life without really knowing where I'm going." Dominic's expression softened, but there was still that unwavering authority in the way he stood. "You're not lost, Emily," he said gently. "You're exactly where you need to be. You've always been exactly where you were meant to be." She turned to face him then, meeting his gaze. There was no malice in his eyes, no arrogance. Just a calm certainty that made her feel both safe and uneasy at the same time. "I don't know if I believe that," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "How can I know that this is the right place for me when everything about this life is so unfamiliar?" Dominic took a step forward, closing the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken understanding. "Because this life isn't about what's familiar," he replied. "It's about what's real. And what's real is that you belong here. With me." His words settled in the room, heavy and unyielding, like a promise that neither of them could escape. Emily opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. She didn't know what to say anymore. She had spent so long trying to fight this, trying to convince herself that there was a way out, but now she was starting to realize that maybe there wasn't. Maybe there never had been. "You don't have to decide anything right now," Dominic continued, his voice low and soothing. "But I want you to understand something, Emily. You're not trapped. You're free. Free to choose how you want to live, how you want to feel. But you don't have to do it alone." Emily's heart raced in her chest as she absorbed his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust him, but there was a lingering doubt that kept her from fully surrendering to the life he was offering. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, barely a breath. "You don't have to," he said, his voice firm now, filled with quiet conviction. "Because I'll take care of you. I always will." The room seemed to grow smaller, the air thicker as Emily stood there, her mind spinning. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She didn't have all the answers, but maybe that was okay. Maybe she didn't need to know everything. Maybe the only thing that mattered was the choice she made in that moment. And as she looked into Dominic's eyes, she realized that the choice was already made. She was here. With him. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to be. Emily had never been one to make decisions quickly. Her life had always been one of careful planning, of weighing every option before making a move. But as the days stretched into weeks in Dominic's world, she found herself letting go of that control. It wasn't as if she had given up entirely, but there was something about the way Dominic lived his life that made her realize there were things beyond her understanding, beyond her control, and maybe that was okay. She had learned to stop resisting, to stop fighting the current that seemed to pull her deeper into his world. And as much as it scared her, there was a part of her that welcomed it. She had always been afraid of what she didn't understand, but now, for the first time, she was beginning to see that there was a certain freedom in surrendering. Dominic had never asked her to change, never demanded anything from her except that she trust him. And over time, she had. She had learned to trust him not just because of his actions, but because of the way he made her feel, safe, protected, like nothing in the world could harm her as long as she was with him. But it was more than that. It was the way he made her feel seen, understood in a way no one ever had. He wasn't perfect, she knew that. He had his own secrets, his own burdens that he carried, but there was a depth to him, a vulnerability that he rarely showed anyone. And when he did, she found herself wanting to be there for him, just as he had been there for her. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Emily found herself standing by the window again, watching the world outside. The mansion was quiet, still, but she didn't feel the loneliness she once had. She felt a connection to it now, a strange sense of belonging. She had stopped thinking about escaping, stopped looking for a way out. This was her life now. And as much as it terrified her, she knew there was no turning back. Dominic entered the room quietly, his presence as commanding as always. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her for a moment, his gaze steady and calm. "You look peaceful," he said, his voice soft, almost like a whisper. Emily turned to face him, her heart fluttering slightly at the sight of him standing there, so calm, so confident. She didn't know what she was supposed to feel anymore, but in that moment, she felt something settle inside her. Something that had been missing for a long time. "I feel..." she began, but her words trailed off. What could she say? How could she explain everything that was happening inside her? "You feel like you're where you're meant to be," Dominic finished for her, his voice gentle, understanding. She didn't say anything at first. He was right. She had been fighting it for so long, but now, she realized he was right. This was where she was meant to be. With him. "I never thought I would say this," she said softly, almost to herself. "But I don't want to leave." Dominic's gaze softened then, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't expected, a warmth, a tenderness. "I don't want you to leave," he said quietly, taking a step toward her. His voice, always so controlled, was laced with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "You belong here, Emily. With me." There was no need for more words. The air between them felt thick with understanding, with something unspoken but deeply felt. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that in that moment, standing there with him, she wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time, she felt like she had found a place where she truly belonged. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Emily stood at the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon, watching the last rays of the sun disappear beyond the distant hills. The mansion behind her felt like a different world now, a world she had come to understand, even accept. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, but in some ways, it was everything she needed. She had stopped fighting it, stopped resisting the path that Dominic had set before her. She had come to see the world through his eyes, not just as a prisoner of circumstance, but as someone who had found their place in a life of power and purpose. And as strange as it was, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. Dominic was right about one thing, she didn't belong anywhere else. She had never fit into the life she had left behind, the one where she struggled to make ends meet, the one where she constantly felt like she was running from something. But here, with him, she didn't feel that way. Here, there was no need to run. Here, there was only the quiet certainty of her place beside him. "You've been thinking a lot again," Dominic's voice broke through her thoughts, smooth and familiar. Emily turned to face him, offering him a small smile. "I guess I have," she said, her voice soft but steady. "A lot has changed, hasn't it?" He didn't answer immediately, but his eyes never left hers, a quiet understanding passing between them. "It has," he said after a pause. "And so have you." Emily took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. She had changed, hadn't she? In ways she couldn't even explain. She wasn't the same person who had first walked into this mansion, frightened and unsure. She had grown, learned to navigate this world, and, in the process, had found herself. "I didn't think I could," she admitted, her voice tinged with something she hadn't expected, vulnerability. "I didn't think I could ever be the person you wanted me to be." Dominic stepped closer, his gaze softening. "I never wanted you to be anyone else, Emily," he said, his voice low, filled with something she couldn't quite place. "I just wanted you to see that you were already enough." The words settled over her like a warm embrace, and for the first time, she truly understood what he meant. She had spent so long doubting herself, trying to be something she wasn't, but in Dominic's world, in his presence, she had found the freedom to just be. She wasn't forced to fit into a mold. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to be herself. And in his eyes, that was enough. I think I'm starting to believe that, Emily said quietly, her voice full of uncertainty but also something else, hope. Dominic reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch light but reassuring. You've always belonged here, Emily, he said softly. And I've always known it. You just had to realize it for yourself. Emily nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She had found her place in this life, with Dominic, and that was enough for now. Whatever happened next, she would face it with him by her side. And in that moment, with the weight of the world falling away, Emily realized that she had stopped running. She wasn't looking for a way out anymore. Because this was where she was meant to be.